Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Future of Jewish podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Hoffman. On this episode, I am joined by Elisheva Kupferman. She's the Chief Strategy Officer at Mosaic United, an Israel-based organization that brings together, spurs, and equips organizations working to strengthen the connection of young Jews to their Jewish identities and Israel. Prior to joining Mosaic United, Kupferman served as Strategic Planner and Educator at Makom, the Israel Education Lab at the Jewish Agency for Israel. And she also spent more than a decade as an experiential educator and running leadership programs for teens in a variety of educational settings. Enjoy my conversation with Elisheva Kupferman. Elisheva, wow, this is exciting. So happy to talk to you today. You have a beautiful smile, which my listeners won't be able to see, but I do want to call it, you have a beautiful smile. So, but also let's talk about, where you came from, all the good things that led to where you are today. Give us some background into that good stuff.
Well, I grew up in New York in a town called Riverdale. My story isn't particularly interesting other than my parents, I would say, represent two very profound nationalisms. My mother's side, my mother grew up completely secular, and her parents were very patriotic. Her father fought in the U.S. military in World War II. Americanism was their passion, and humanitarianism and being good civilians and good members of society, and just very, very patriotic and love and gratitude for everything America stood for, particularly for Jews. My father's side were Holocaust survivors, and my grandparents, who survived in totally different ways and in different settings, started a family, which for my grandfather was his second family, out of a deep passion to continue that I don't understand to this day, from where they drew that strength. They decided to raise a family Orthodox, which I think is also not insignificant, seeing what they had seen and experienced what they had experienced. And so my mother, on her journey, did herself become Orthodox on her own, and my parents met and raised a family, and I'm very grateful to my upbringing. But I think those two energies were very profound in the shaping of my identity, and at different stages of my life have sort of, vacillated in terms of the significance of one or the other. But I always felt very, very Zionist, very Jewish, very part of the Jewish collective experience. It was really, really in my blood. And at the same time, the American story was there in the background, I think, asking questions all the time of, the balance of the two identities and the commitments of one versus the other. Obviously, sometimes they live in perfect harmony, and other times they came into conflict. Around high school, I would say I got very involved in the modern Orthodox Zionist youth movement, B'nai Akiva, and decided I wanted to make Aliyah, move to Israel. And it was as if at that moment, the sort of like Jewish nationalism was winning, if you could put it that way. And I became singularly focused in making that dream a reality. And straight after high school, I moved to Israel on my own and made Aliyah. Built a life in Israel that I'm very proud of, and have been living in Israel now almost as long as I lived in America, which is pretty wild. And eventually, when I was making professional choices, I was in graduate school studying nonprofit management. I was in an international program. So there were people from all over the world with like the most inspiring convictions in the world. And some of them just so clear, like my passion is to work on AIDS relief in Africa, or my passion is to work on poverty in wherever. And I remember looking at my classmates in such awe and also jealousy because I didn't feel that I had that sort of one burning passion that I knew I was going to commit my life to. I really felt, and to this day, to a large extent, feel like a generalist. Like I feel very compelled by many different things, and had a hard time settling. I think my first two nonprofit jobs were more in the welfare human service space. I think I really wanted that to be my home. And at a certain point, just looked in the mirror and said, like, this whole Jewish identity, Jewish diaspora, and state of Israel intersection, this is your passion. It's just so implicit in your identity that you don't see it. It's just the identity, the glasses through which you see the world. And so at a certain point, I made a decision to leave the sort of human welfare, human services sector and work in the Jewish world. And I worked for many years as an informal Jewish educator, and sort of gradually built into that more of a strategic planning focus. And today I work almost exclusively with the strategic planning hat on, but positioned exactly in that intersection of Israel, Jewish diaspora, Jewish peoplehood, collective responsibility for the global Jewish future. That's where I found my home, and I feel like I have the greatest job in the world, and I feel so privileged to really get to, on the one hand, dig into this very particular niche. On the other hand, my job allows me to stay pretty general within that niche, and my vantage point is really on global Jewry and not on one particular type of Jewish experience, but on a range of Jewish experiences. So that's me today.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing all of that. Just making a note here to talk about range of Jewish experiences. But I want to actually talk about, you're talking about how you started in sort of the social welfare, human welfare aspect of the Jewish world. Now you're more into what I guess we can call experiential aspects of the Jewish world. And to me, they should be a two-way street, one to the other, meaning if more people have better Jewish experiences, right? And Judaism and Jewishness becomes, as a result of having better Jewish experiences, a deeper and better part or more significant part of their total identity as a human being, not just their Jewish identity, then in theory, those people that have the financial and other resources would then give money to sort of the social welfare aspects of the Jewish world, right? Donate effectively. Then that part of the Jewish world would uplift more people. Some of those people will become quote unquote financially successful. They would then have better Jewish experiences. And now you create what I believe is a virtuous cycle. I see, people that are listening to this podcast can't see you, but I can, and you're shaking your head quite consistently here. So tell me what's going through your mind as I say that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. Just to clarify, my first two jobs weren't specifically working in the Jewish world per se. It might have been in Israel, so the context may have been mostly Jewish in the spaces where I was working. But what I meant was that the mission of the work was not just to help the Jewish particular. It was, people who are dealing with serious illnesses or people who are poverty stricken. It wasn't a job that was geared to or targeting Jewish people specifically. And the change for me was deciding that I wanted to dedicate my time to specifically the Jewish people. But I agree with everything that you said. And I also believe in my bones that the more the Jewish experience and Jewish identity is alive and robust for an individual, the more they will be sort of naturally called to address all human need. And I don't think it's a coincidence that a disproportionate number of volunteers in social causes around the world are Jews, because I think our tradition asks of us not to turn a blind eye to the needs that are right in front of our faces. And I don't think we would be doing a great job teaching people about Jewish values if it didn't lead to social activism. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And let's just peel that apart a little bit, because what you're talking about here is what I believe to be a growing struggle between people our age and younger, Jewish people, of course, around the world, and also in Israel, by the way, where we understand these Jewish values that you're talking about of social activism, but we are increasingly, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but generally speaking, we are increasingly channeling those so-called Jewish values to non-Jewish organizations, to non-Jewish activities and types of volunteerism. And in fact, I saw one study, I think out of the States, where basically all young Jewish adults agree that social activism is important and a part of their life, and yet 72% of them do it in non-Jewish ways. And so I guess what I would want to ask you, because it seems like you've now played in both of these, in these courts, so to speak, is how does one juggle, sort of the work for the Jews, by the Jews type of thing, or volunteer, whatever you want to call it, and also the greater world, right? Like that to me is where I think a lot of Jews are struggling and saying, wait, you're telling me social activism is a key part of Jewish value, and yet at the same time, I want to go volunteer for the local YMCA, or for, Teach for America, or for the, thousands of nonprofits in Israel, and of course around the world. How did you deal with that juggling act? And what can you maybe teach some of the rest of us about how we can do it as well?
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to say is that I think to a certain extent, especially in today's generation, it is a bit of a false dichotomy, because just because a person is doing an act that to someone else might not look explicitly Jewish does not tell us anything about what is in the heart of that person, and what is motivating their decision to take that action. One of the things that I've sort of been feeling for a long time is that a lot of our measures of Jewish identity and Jewish commitment are outdated. We look at certain behaviors and we count certain behaviors, and they might be, do you light Shabbat candles, or do you have a Passover Seder, and whatever it is on all these Jewish surveys. And maybe a better question is, when you're volunteering, what's in your heart? Like, are you doing that from a place of feeling like this is a religious or moral conviction that you feel because of who you are and your particular circumstances and heritage? So that's, I think, the first. The second thing that I want to say is, maybe like once an educator, always an educator, but I really do believe in literacy, and I believe in education, and I believe in hard questions that individuals ask themselves or get asked and explore themselves. And I think that that's what makes the difference between an act that's humanitarian and feels good, and an act that's particularly Jewish. It might not be evident to someone else, but if I understand this cultural inheritance that I have as a Jew who was born in the time that I was born in, then that might make all the difference for me, compared to someone doing the same thing as me, but didn't learn those sources, didn't probe those questions, didn't explore their own identity and commitments. I do think that as a community, we have a lot of work to do to better understand how Jews today express themselves Jewishly, and what the right indicators are to check that if we're interested in checking it.
Absolutely. So talk to me about now more the experiential aspect of the Jewish world, because I'm a big believer in it, for the reasons we talked about with that virtuous cycle before, and for other reasons. You mentioned a range of Jewish experiences, and I'm just curious, can you expand on that? What does that mean in your eyes?
Yeah. Well, I'll talk a bit about Mosaic United, where I've been working for almost 4.5 years now. The sort of mandate that Mosaic United, as a nonprofit organization that was founded out of actually like an Israeli government initiative to explore what it would look like for the Israelis to invest in Jewish life around the world, and not because Israel had something to gain out of it, right? Not so that more Jews make Aliyah, and not so that Jews around the world will be fierce defenders of Israel, but an understanding that we're global people and strong communities everywhere are good for everyone, wherever they are. There was a rigorous research process that went into the founding of Mosaic that predated my time here, that essentially identified some key touch points that are relatively evidence-based at this point, in terms of Jewish impact over time. So there are a few sort of magic tools in the Jewish experiential toolbox that for one reason or another seem to really be profound and work. One is Jewish summer camp. One is Israel experiences in Israel, so with a social peer group. Another is volunteering through a Jewish lens. Jewish life on campus, or sort of the university age as being a key inflection point for Jews in exploring their identities and interests, and various other ones. So I think the decision not to dig into one, but really to look at all of them, is first to say the Jewish world is pretty siloed, and it's kind of a shame that such an investment, for example, is being made in the college campus space, but those campus professionals sort of need to identify who their constituents are from scratch from day one, when an equally large investment was made a few years earlier in high school, and before that at bar and bat mitzvah, and before that, right? And there's something about looking at a Jewish person as someone who moves through all of these life experiences and stages as a whole, as someone who's not landing in a Hillel as if it's their first Jewish encounter. For some it may be, which gets me to my second point, which is, on the other hand, if there are some people who are just never going to step foot in one of those stations, right? Because it's not interesting to them, because they didn't have access to it, because they didn't feel permission to enter in that place. And so by broadening the lens and saying we're looking at all of these stations, it means we have a better chance at reaching people who may not have entered through one gate, but would enter through another. So I think what we're looking at is like a yes and. Like if an individual decides to take part in every Jewish opportunity handed to them and searchable on Google, great. And for those who aren't going to be doing that, maybe we can find something that is going to be interesting and relevant to that individual, and then learn how to make it more accessible, maybe more scalable, adapted to different settings, which brings me to the other exciting thing about what we do, which is we really have a global mandate, and we're not just looking at North American Jewry, we're not just looking at European Jewry, we're tasked with figuring out what's going to be resonant in every community. Is for some projects it's the same thing, right? Like look at Tagli, Birthright. It's the same product in every market. And it works. Obviously some communities, they're more highly saturated than in others, but that's an example of a product that's just easily translatable. And then there are others. I mentioned summer camps before. The summer camp experience in Europe looks nothing like the summer camp experience on the East Coast in North America. And that looks really different from the summer camp experience on the West Coast of North America. So understanding also the differences helps us better design interventions that are going to work in the various settings. And I don't think there are a lot of Jewish organizations today that are really committed to learning about all of those cultural and geographic contexts. Yeah.
Wow. First of all, you're making me emotional. And again, people can't see us, but you just beautifully illustrated the opportunities and also the challenges that we have in the Jewish world. I love when you use words like global and scalable. I love how you understand that for some Jews, there is, I don't want to call it a cookie cutter because it has a negative connotation, but certainly a boxable experience that you can offer them. You mentioned birthright being one of those, maybe Hillel's another one, but you also are clearly aware that Jews today want so many different things, and so you can't put everyone in the same box. And in fact, I would argue that more Jews, both in Israel and around the world, are not even sure what they want in the Jewish world because they haven't had that fire lit under their tuhis, that Jewish fire that says, wait, what does it look like when I send my kid to a Jewish, or send my kid to, a university, and what does that Jewish experience look like for him or her? What does it look like for me as a 13-year-old if I want to go to a sports camp this summer or to a Jewish camp that does sports? What does it look like if I'm traveling and I want to go to Japan or I want to go to Israel? And understanding that there's opportunities that I believe we're completely missing in the Jewish world by and large. Not to say that they're not. There is some good individual sort of successes in organizations, but on the macro level, I think we're really missing these opportunities because people want everything I just talked about. They want to send their kids to a good camp. They want their kids to have a good experience on college campuses. They travel. They are always looking for wisdom, whether it's for their business, their career, their family, and their personal life with themselves, self-help. All these things exist in the Jewish world or can exist. The question is, how do we deliver it? How do we scale it? How do we make it global? So that one of the things that I think we align on, which this is the first time I'm meeting you, so we didn't really know this, is that, by and large, what we're saying is different Jewish experiences for different people around the world, including in Israel. And that's an issue when, for example, the American Jews only have the American Jewish experience, don't have access to, for example, the Israeli experience or the German experience or the Australian experience, and then vice versa, right? And so it's not about saying don't we're not talking negatively about any one of these Jewish cultures or subcultures. What we're really saying, I think, is, like you said, yes, and, right? So yes, American Jewish culture is great, and American Jews should also have the opportunity and tap into Israeli culture and other Jewish cultures around the world. I guess what I'm wondering from you is, there aren't a lot of organizations that are thinking global, and there are not a lot of organizations, and I'm sorry for saying this, Elisheva, but we have to be honest in these conversations. There are not a lot of organizations that wake up every day and say, are we doing what's best for the Jewish people? We know that they're doing what's best for their organization, but are they doing what's best for the Jewish people? And I think that is a line that we have to draw very clear in the sand and say, if you're only doing what's best for your Jewish organization and not as an extension what's best for the Jewish people, then to me that feels very un-Jewish. And I know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I get that. I'm not saying one or the other. It's not either or, it's yes and, as you so beautifully said. And so again, you're shaking your head. I'm just curious, how do we, me and you, and I'm sure there are other people in the Jewish world that think like us and that are listening to this and agree wholeheartedly that do what's best for your organization and also ensure that what you're doing is aligned with what's best for the Jewish world. How do we do that in a better, more scalable and more profound way?
Yeah, I'm not sure I know the answer, but my sense is a huge weak spot is that all of this very important work is positioned in the nonprofit sector, because you can't really blame an organization for thinking about itself when its survival is under threat, when it may not have the resources it needs to sort of get that confidence to be able to think bigger than itself. That's not something that I think you or I could solve today, but it is something to think about. It's natural that educational endeavors sit on the nonprofit spectrum or on the nonprofit end of the social economic spectrum, but I don't think that it needs to be that way. And there are plenty of examples today of educational innovations that are for profit, or in certain countries, there are corporate structures that are not in this binary of profit or for profit that I think allow for a lot more experimentation and innovation. And my sense is that if we could give our organizations and our talented professionals a little bit more breathing room, we'd probably be surprised with what they come up with. But I understand what you're referring to, and I have experienced it in many of the places that I've worked. And you almost can't blame the professionals for thinking that way.
Yeah, but like fair point taken. And also, like, to me, part of the issue in the Jewish world is a mentality of scarcity versus a mentality of abundance. And I know that's not just in the Jewish world, it's actually in the nonprofit world, but because the Jewish world is predominantly nonprofit, therefore it's also predominant in the Jewish world. And so I guess what I'm saying is, like, if an organization, no matter how big or small or how international or local you are, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I don't think that what's good for your organization is necessarily bad for the Jewish world and vice versa. I think there are parallels and they should be sought after, because only for the reason of this, it's actually in the best interest of the Jewish world. It's called, there's a term for it and now it's escaping me, but I think it's called enlightened selfishness or something like that. There's a term about this where basically what it says is, if you give with the exception of getting back, you're probably not gonna get anything back. But if you just keep giving, eventually you're gonna get something back. And you might not know where it's gonna come from and when it's gonna come, but it's gonna come back. And it's the same thing that I would say to every Jewish organization, is if you truly align yourself with both, not either or, but both what's good for your Jewish organization and for the Jewish people and the entire Jewish world. And you might not be able to measure that completely. And you might not be able to even leverage that to continue to fundraise, which we know is an issue. But if you play in both courts at the same time, what I would call, micro and macro, then all of a sudden, if the Jewish world becomes better, then everything within the Jewish world also becomes better, which means every organization becomes stronger, which therefore translates to more money, more resources, more reach, more impact, etc. And that, to me, is where we're really missing the mark. Is not if for-profit, nonprofit. It's really about saying we live in a world of abundance. I can go to the market right now and I'm not rich and I can buy every fruit I want. Okay. And I can get on a plane and for a few $100 or shekels, I can be all over Europe. I mean, people don't understand that we live in a world of abundance and there's enough to go around for everybody, unless we're all being selfish. Because the minute where one person is selfish, the rest of us are selfish, right? That's basically the story of the downfall of the traditional kibbutzim, is that the minute where one family starts saying, wait, I'm not going to subscribe to what's good for the kibbutz. I want my own, big screen TV or my own smartphone or my own this. Then his neighbor was like, well, if Yossi is getting that, then I want that. And then boom, all of a sudden downfall. Socialism creates capitalism. That's what people don't understand. The most successful, financially successful sports league in the United States, our former country, is the National Football League. Why is it the most successful? Because it's a socialist league. Complete revenue sharing amongst all 30 teams equal. So you don't have, the team in Jacksonville, which is a tiny market, versus the team in LA, which is a massive market. They get the same revenues because it's league-wide revenue sharing equal amongst all the teams. And it's the same thing that I would say in the Jewish world. If you do what's best for the sum, for the group, and not only what's best for the individual, then the pie grows and we all share in that. And it becomes a virtuous cycle. And right now, I think we're living in a time of a vicious cycle, which could ultimately lead to, I don't want to say the downfall of the Jews. We're not going to become extinct. But I always remind people, it's worse to become irrelevant than to become extinct. Meaning, if you're irrelevant, you're still around, but no one cares about you. If you're extinct, at least you don't have to worry about being irrelevant. And I really fear that the organizational leadership or lack thereof in the Jewish world is pushing us in that direction.
I mean, you ask about scarcity versus abundance mentality. And I think if we're really, really being honest and scratch beneath the surface, what we find is fear. There's a real existential fear that we could typify as generational, or old guard, new guard, or I don't know. There's a few ways we could slice it, but there's a fear over the future of Jewish, like your podcast is, and I think asking people who are terrified that Judaism as they know it may not continue to relinquish control it ain't gonna happen, right? Because
but I want to push back on that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Because, and this is a complete generalization, but the Jew who is terrified, as you say, and by the way, you're completely right. You're completely right that they're terrified, that they're effectively scared of change and scared of evolution and transformation, which we know is a psychological condition of every human being, is also probably driving today a Tesla. And so that's the irony, is like, you're using the latest iPhone and you have the new biggest TV and you're living in the newest neighborhood and you're traveling to the cool newest places and driving the newest cars. So on one hand, it's okay to take part in change, right? Tesla is an EV. You're not driving around on camels and horse and carriages anymore. But on the other hand, you're trying to hold on to the past. And I'm not saying erase the past. In fact, I'm saying if we look at Jewish education, we actually need to go deeper into the past, because we'll find there, the deeper we go and the farther back we go in Judaism, the better it gets, in my opinion. I'm not saying delete the past or get rid of the past. I'm saying the more that you repel something, the more that it comes and it smacks you in the face. And I think that is where, that to me is the difference between, one of the differences at least, between a leader and a bureaucrat. A bureaucrat maintains the status quo, doesn't take any risks, or doesn't take any risk that he 99.9% sure is not going to result in some type of failure, versus a true leader who says, you know what, I don't know what the future is going to be. There's always going to be a level of uncertainty, but I know the way the world works, and we evolve, and I don't like to use the word change, but I would say we transform, we evolve, we iterate. And if I, as the leader so-called of an organization, repel that change for fear, right? Then actually, not only is the change going to happen, but it's going to smack my organization in the face, and it's going to hurt my organization. And I think that's the irony. The other thing that I want to call out is a great quote that says, courage is not the absence of fear, right? I think that's where a lot of people mistake what courage is. Courage is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And I think that is where, when you understand the true definition of courage, as I just described it, then all of a sudden you can say, you know what, it's okay to be scared. That's a natural human feeling. But if we're allowing fear to dictate our lives and our decisions and those that we influence outside of us, that is being uncourageous.
I completely agree with you. I think that fear too often leads people to make irrational priorities or choices. And I think there are examples of brave individuals or brave institutions who are willing to change and innovate. It just can take time. And I think part of the work that we're trying to do is make sure that in that interim, we don't sort of lose out on lots of opportunity. And that's, I mean, I'm an optimist, and from my perch, I've seen a lot of really, really exciting, innovative, different, creative, grassroots Jewish organizations, activists, and opportunities. The biggest struggle is sustainability and financial stability, and it's a very challenging climate right now where so much of the Jewish assets are kind of cloistered in one corner, and so much of the exciting work is happening in different corners. And if we can make a dent in that sort of division or separation, I think that we would be helping the evolution happen at a faster pace. And that's certainly something that I feel a responsibility to work on.
Absolutely. But just so we're clear, not only for me, but for the audience, when you say that so many of the Jewish assets are cloistered in one corner, so to speak, can you just sort of expand on that a bit?
Traditional institutions, traditional structures, and communal structures, which I think always have been very significant and are still extremely significant, but aren't relevant to everyone who's interested in Jewish life and Judaism. And yeah, it happens to be that because of the transfer of wealth and just the way that Jewish organizational life evolved in the 20th century, there are a lot of sort of stable, financially stable institutions that are looking for young people and not succeeding as much as they would like in attracting them or interesting them. And on the other hand, there are many very interesting and exciting younger initiatives that are not succeeding in stabilizing themselves, mostly because of financial resources. And it's kind of like, hello, like, can someone get in here and mediate? Like, can we just get someone to help these two kind of different voices that are to see that they're working on the same thing and they actually need each other? And unfortunately, that's not common enough.
Yeah, you're right. It is unfortunate, but I think the challenge is there for the opportunity, right? And so all it takes is one person or organization from each of those groups to come together and to say, listen, we are going to forge, I don't want to say a new path, but a little bit of a divergent path, a little bit off the beaten path, not totally in the wrong direction, or the opposite direction, I should say, but we are going to play a little bit of a different game, rewrite some of the existing rules. And I think that when you understand that all it takes is one on each side, then the question is, who's going to step up? Because whoever steps up, of course, it seems like it's a risk and it seems like it's the unknown and all this, that, and the other. But all it takes is one on each side. And if you're not that one, this is what I always tell people. And I know the world's not black and white, but sometimes in the case of disruption, it is. Either you're going to be the disruptor or the disrupted. Either you're going to be proactive or you're going to be reactive. And it doesn't mean, by the way, when you say be disrupted, that you're going to just vanish out of thin air tomorrow. But it does, like I go back to what I said a few minutes ago. It's better to be extinct or go out of business in the for-profit world, we would say, than to be irrelevant. Because at the end of the day, being irrelevant means that you have to show up to work every day uninspired, because you know you're irrelevant. You know that most people don't really give a crap about, about you anymore, or enough people don't give a crap, meaning, you always have your very small base. And if that's good for you, that's great. But on the international stage, on the international stage, so to speak, where the real innovations are happening and where, the most exciting opportunities are coming, you're not going to be there. You're not going to be close. And I think that, at the end of the day, we all want to show up to work every day and do important work and feel like we're making a difference in some small ways. But we know that the majority of people that show up to work in the Jewish world today are not feeling that way. And that's not my opinion. There's a, Leading Edge just does a study every year. And it found that the majority of Jewish professionals, this was in North America, but that's a huge population of Jews, are not feeling that what they're doing is making a difference. It's like 55 or 60%. And so that's a bad place to be, because again, it goes back to that vicious cycle. It's like, if I show up to work every day feeling uninspired, then eventually I'm not going to keep showing up to that place of work. I'm going to seek out in other places. And we know a lot of Jews and Jewish professionals end up leaving the Jewish world professionally, of course. And so that's a very dangerous place for us to be, because, I mean, look at what I would call some of the most impactful brands in the world, right? I mean, everyone has their definition of what that means, but I'll just throw out names like Tesla and Facebook and maybe TikTok now and Apple and Google, maybe Microsoft, etc. You get the point. I would argue that the majority, if not the vast majority of their employees show up to work every day and are pretty, not necessarily excited, but are pretty plugged into what they're working on, who they're working with, and ultimately what they're bringing to the world. And, that's what mostly concerns me, is like, if we don't have the best people working on the biggest problems and opportunities in the Jewish world, then we're only going to make them worse. We're not going to make them better.
I think you're right. I think part of what you're saying is a huge challenge, in the sense that are our Jewish employers risk takers? Are they willing to innovate? Are they willing to experiment? Are they willing to go out of the comfort zone? Are they willing to fund things that are less proven or that don't feel as comfortable and trusted and legitimate as them? I think that's one piece of it. I think another piece of it, in terms of the sort of Jewish employee satisfaction question, is it's really hard work being in a sector where you need to convince people of the importance of what you do. Sort of going back to the human services versus Jewish education or Jewish identity, one of the best things about working in human services is that no one questions if your work is important. It's so self-evident, right? Like, there are hungry people, there are sick people, there are people who need help, and it's so evident that what you're doing is important. When you're working in education, it's, I actually am trying to convince consumers that they need what I'm trying to sell. It can be a lot more tiring on a professional to go through their career that way. And it reminds me of another sort of dichotomy that I experience in my professional life, which is, I'm going to say North America versus other Jewish communities around the world. It's a straw man, because it's not true. It's probably more a question of community size or what have you. But a few years ago, in a previous position that I held, I did a mapping of needs of Jewish educators around the world. And we did qualitative research. We interviewed educators in a host of different countries on different continents to learn what they feel their needs are, what are the pain points in their work. So this one feels like there's, not enough, there's too much turnover, and this one feels that the curricular materials aren't exactly right. But the thing that I walked away with most profoundly was that in many countries, in particular, I'll give examples. We spoke to educators from Brazil who just felt that they needed resources, educational resources, curricular materials. Now, in my previous position, I spent many hours writing Jewish and Israel themed curriculum, and then spending many hours trying to work with educators and say, use these are really different. These are going to, make a case or make a point in a new way. And sometimes they would buy it and sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes they would go through a big training. And a lot of times those materials would end up in a drawer somewhere and not be used. And then to hear from the mouth of a person saying that thing that is sitting in someone's drawer would be so significant to me, but no one's doing it in my language, right? Like Brazilian kids don't speak Spanish, and everyone thinks that whatever works in Argentina is just going to work in Brazil, and it doesn't. And that feeling of like there are places that really, really need us, where we could have we could add very clear value, right? And we experience this in our work all the time, right? And there are parts of the world, and there are Jewish communities where Mosaic United or the government of Israel could invest in Jewish communal resources, and no one would question whether or not it was a good use of resources. Like, Israeli taxpayers should be paying for that. That's amazing. There's clearly a need. There's a demand coming from the ground, and we would all feel so good that we're providing that. And I hope that we do that, and that we can play a small role in providing Jewish communities additional resources that are truly needed. But I also think that if we focus only on needs like that are very evident and that are calling loudly for us, we would be ignoring probably the bigger challenge, and probably the more uncomfortable challenge, which is the one we see all too often or rampantly in North America, where identity is fluid, and young people, especially today, have a choice. How much is this going to be a relevant part of their identity? They have many, and they all play different roles and come out in different dosages at different times. And there it's about, are we making a strong enough case about why be Jewish and what does Judaism offer you? And I don't think today we're making a strong enough case, but I don't think we can give up. So really what I'm saying is we need to do it all, right? We need to be in places that are asking for concrete needs, where we could play a significant role in serving those needs. And we also need to be in places that might not be calling, because I mean, that's where the innovation is going to be most important. And that's where we're going to need to be boldest and take bigger risks, because we need to be constantly iterating and coming up with a better proposition for.
Absolutely. Although I would say that I think that, you said something like that they're not calling for help, and you're totally right that they're not calling for help in the same ways as you really just amazingly described right now, this picture. I would say that they're calling for something different. They're not calling for necessarily food and water and shelter. They're calling for what we might call like first world problems, or meaning. Yeah, exactly. And so I think so they're and it's not just, by the way, the US Jews or the North American Jews, it's the Israeli Jews that I meet, it's Jews all around the world, and it's people all around the world. Forget just Jews. We're all calling for meaning. Of course, if they talk about in North Korea that one of the reasons why they effectively starve their citizens is because if all you have to do every day is think about how hungry you are, then you can't think about the bigger questions in life, so to speak. So if we put, sort of those groups of, unfortunately, if we put them aside and say, okay, obviously there's people, both Jewish and non-Jewish, who have those very clear basic needs. Let's just put those people aside just for a second, not ignoring them, not saying they're less important. They're probably even more important. But the ones that are calling for meaning and purpose and value, they're calling loud and clear, and they're not calling in words or even in text, like in a social media post. They're calling in their actions. They're saying, I'd rather go and do mindful meditation at this retreat, and instead of going to Israel, I'd rather go to India or South America or wherever, and instead of choosing to read a self-help book written by who knows who, or I should say the opposite. Instead of, I'm sitting next to a book that's the 48 Ways to Wisdom, which was written by Rabbi Noah Weinberg, who's the founder of Aish. Right now, 2 years ago, Elisheva, if you would have told me what self-help book are you reading right now, I would have said The Obstacle is the Way. I would have said Start with Why, whatever. These are just, great books written by other people that have nothing to do with Judaism. And now I'm reading a book written by a rabbi about wisdom. And so that's the thing, is the Jews that have the privilege to look above their basic needs and think about their life beyond those things on a day-to-day basis, they're loud and clear. There's no secret about what they want and what they're searching for and what they think is good for them. The question is the existing Jewish establishment, so to speak, or institutions, whatever you want to call them, and frankly, the people that run these places, are they listening? I would venture to say, again, on a very general macro level, the answer is probably no. And if they are listening, which I do believe some are listening, do they have the ability to serve them? And are they willing to make very hard decisions, which often could mean driving your organization in a slightly different direction than historically it was, based on the evolving nature of the human being? Meaning, let's look at the Jewish Agency for Israel. This is an example, by the way, a great organization. I'm not, picking on them, but this is an organization that I believe was started in 1929 for very specific core reasons, right? And those reasons have changed over the years. And so in 2022, moving forward, almost 100 years later, the idea of Aliyah has changed. And the idea of just human mobility in general has changed, right? So Aliyah in 1929, first of all, there was Aliyah, but it was pre-state Israel Aliyah. So the idea of what they were set up to do back then versus what is needed in the communities today, we know they're different. And yet, a lot of organizations, and in this case, actually, the Jewish Agency has pivoted, but a lot of organizations have not, and they're resting on their laurels, and they're scared that somebody who gave them, a significant amount of money, or has been sitting on the board for a significant amount of time, that they're scared to ruffle those feathers. And who gets hurt is not the organization, and is not the board, and is not even the top brass. It's the communities, and it's the individual. And that's the irony. In fact, the name of this, I just wrote it to myself as we were talking. The name of this podcast episode is Hidden Ironies in the Jewish World with Elisheva Kupferman. Because that's what we're talking about here, is that ultimately when you don't pivot and when you don't change and when you repel those things, you just end up hurting yourself. Because your constituents and the consumer, so to speak, and the communities that you aim to serve, they're going to look for what they're going to look for in other places, and they're going to find it in other places. And so when they get older, especially the young folks, and when we get into a place where we have, discretionary income to the point where we can be donating, are we going to be donating to your organization, or are we going to be donating to others? And I'm not talking about others in the Jewish world. I'm talking about others outside of the Jewish world. And I think that's the irony. Is I saw this with my university, San Diego State University. I was a diehard student, meaning I loved the university. I was totally plugged in. Did volunteer work. I did all types of stuff, but I didn't feel that as a two-way street. And so when I came to the university and I said, hey, maybe we can try doing this or that, there was no one to talk to because no one wanted to make a decision. And so then the minute where you graduate, you start, you move into the student database, from the student database to the alumni database, and all of a sudden donate to the school. Well, why am I going to donate to a school that I loved so dearly, but I didn't feel loved me back? Why would I do that with my money? And I think you can say the same thing with the Jewish world. Is people are looking for these things, and they want to love you. They want to love you. They want to love you as an organization. They want to love Judaism as a religion, a culture, a people, a history, etc. They want to love Israel. They want to love you, so to speak. But do you love them? And I think every organization is going to have to start asking themselves that question. Do we really love them as much as we think they should or could love us? And if the answer is no, that's an issue.
I agree.
So tell me a little bit about Mosaic, because Mosaic is one of the organizations that I feel flies too much under the radar. For different reasons. We can talk about those if you want, but more importantly, what I really want to talk about is tell us about the great work that you guys are doing, because in my mind, you are doing tremendous work. You are reaching scale. You are taking a global approach, but you're also not, limiting yourself from still acting local in many ways. So why don't you just tell us a little bit more about Mosaic?
Sure. Well, I mentioned before the sort of history of how Mosaic came as an initiative of the government of Israel. Today, we've been active for over 8 years and essentially have funds allocated from Israel's budget that are locked away by the Treasury until we find philanthropic match funds in order to release it. So part of the idea is, yes, we want to invest in Jewish communal life and well-being everywhere, but no one said that Israel has all the answers and that these Jewish professionals sitting in Jerusalem should be deciding what happens in the communities everywhere else. So we don't have a mandate to act unless there's philanthropic and organizational partnership around the world. Essentially, that's what we do. We do a lot of research. We learn everything that we can about what's going on in the Jewish world, both in the larger institutional organizations and in the grassroots activist organizations, to learn about what's working, what's not working, what's new, what's being funded, what isn't being funded, where there's opportunity. And we do our best to put together an intervention platform, again, assuming that there's interest and partnership from the ground, that is going to elevate that particular space. So we are B2B. We don't compete with any Jewish organizations. We work in partnership, and essentially we offer resources, financial resources, educational resources sometimes, to Jewish organizations that we partner with. And we offer best practices and criteria that basically emerge from our research process, in the hope that we can sort of move the needle in a particular direction together with our partners. To date, we have 6 years of experience working on Jewish campuses around the world, 400, 500 Jewish campuses, tens of thousands of students. But we work in partnership. Not every student knows the name Mosaic United. And that's partly by design. We want there to be brands on campus that the kids recognize, and we're looking as the best players on campus who are doing that great work and trying to elevate it and scale what we believe works the best. We launched a couple of years ago an international volunteering platform called Shalom Corps that is meant, again, to elevate all of the organizations working in that space, both primarily for international, global, sort of cross-border service, as well as volunteering at home. And we just finished about a year pilot of a platform for Israelis around the world called Israelim. It's moving on now to its second year and expanding significantly, particularly in Europe, where there are many, many Israeli expats. And we very recently signed an agreement to increase the number of teens going on immersive experiential trips to Israel. We're partnering with Route 1 in North America, and we're looking in the next year to expand to other countries around the world. Because like I said, the Israel trip is just one of those tools in the toolbox that is magic. It just works and it lasts and it's sticky. Experiencing something with all of your senses and with your body, it just works in a way that sitting in a classroom could never. So those are our active partnerships, and everything else, which is primarily what I work on, is in development. So we have a team that does the research and development and tries to figure out what's next and build those partnerships. And like I said, I feel like I have the best job in the world, and I'm so lucky because I really listen. There are a lot of surveys and studies that we can use when we're trying to figure out what are the best practices and what works, and where's there evidence of impact, but there's not that many studies. And so a lot of what we do is map out the organizational landscape and then speak one by one with these talented Jewish professionals and activists around the world who are doing the work, and learning from them about what works and what doesn't work, and trying to think about how do you bottle it and turn it into a criteria that we can incentivize other organizations to do as well with our resources. So it's a puzzle, but it's interesting and very inspiring to get to see really great stuff going on around the world.
Elisheva, this has just been a completely enjoyable and thought-provoking episode. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for inviting me.